have enough lead? Can everyone hear us? Yes, okay. And if anyone's watching online and has any issues with sound, give us a shout.
Can we try Ruby's mic real quick?
Hello, hello.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, welcome to Book Fringe. My name is Myri. I run Lighthouse, Edinburgh's Relic Bookshop, where you are. Book Fringe is running through the month. It's a slightly weird and wonderful, like, cheap and cheerful, come in 30 minutes if you feel the need to move around. If anyone is listening to this from the Arch and you want to join or just hang about for a little bit at the back, feel free. If you have to run off to another show, we also won't take it personally. We are going to do 30 minutes of chit-chat. And if you have burning questions, feel free to chuck a hand up. We also have a bit of a grace period afterwards where you can ask questions of your own, including lovely people online. And then we will finish tightly by 1:45 at the absolute latest. So if you are going to another show, do not have the fear that we have lost track of time. I am going to briefly introduce Ruby. And then you can put your hands together to give her a very warm and welcome, and then we will get going. So Ruby Free is an award-winning campaigner, writer, and conservation biologist based in County Antrim. Her first book, Rathlin, A Wildlife, has just been published. She's passionate about saving nature and reconnecting people to it. She's worked and volunteered in the environmental conservation sector since she was 16 and has been named one of the 100 most influential environmental professionals in the UK on the Ends Power list. She is part of making this world a better place and fighting all the things that we need them to. So will you put your hands together for Ruby Free?
Oh my goodness, that was such a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. And can I just say a massive thank you to you and this beautiful bookshop we're in for holding the space for smaller, more independent publishers who create books like this and share stories like mine. So thank you so much for having me here today. Everyone give you a clap too, please.
Now I get to know how awkward it is to hear nice things about yourself. So just to sort of set us off, can you tell us a little bit about the book, Rathlin, what it is, what it's about, how it came to exist?
Of course. And one crucial thing I also really want to say is thank you all so much for coming and being here today. It's nearly been out a year now. When you were saying newly published, it was like, can it still be newly published? But yeah, it is kind of new, I guess, still. But yeah, it's still surreal having people show up to hear you talk about birds, talk about your experiences, and yeah, I still get that imposter syndrome, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, and hopefully we can all have some fun today. So thank you so much for all coming along. But yes, the book, I call it an accidental book actually. I've always loved illustration, that's drawing on the front cover, and I've always loved writing. But as a neurospicy, as you say, person, I always thought that those were pipe dreams. You know, people want to become singers, they want to become actors. It's just like hard to get there. So when I went to live on Rathlin, after a series of actually unfortunate events, I just began to really thoroughly keep a diary. I'd done it a lot throughout my life, but stopped and started, as I think a lot of people here do. And realised pretty quickly that this is something I had to do on a daily basis. I mean, on my first full day, I saw some white-tailed sea eagles flying around above my head, a species that I had tried to see several times where I grew up in Dorset and failed every time. So I immediately knew this was a special place. And then kind of alongside these amazing wildlife encounters and magical wildlife experiences, lots of things were happening in my personal life that I also kept a log on like just alongside these wildlife memories, and began to realise when I left the island that it had kind of formed into this little memoir. And it wasn't until a lot of friends, family and colleagues at my then job at the RSPB in an environmental policy role told me, oh, you should publish this. So it took me about 2 years to turn WhatsApp voice notes to myself, diaries, sketches. I don't know if anyone here uses the Notes app on their iPhone to keep a log on things sometimes. I like 100 of them, to turn it into a chronologically correct series of events. And then that was the hard part. And then I took all of these ramblings to a publisher and had the dream of then working with an editor to turn it into this. So that's kind of how it came to be.
And so what are you covering in the book? What birds are we meeting?
Yes, what we're covering, very important. So I think what I love about the book is that from the outside it's yellow and it's bright and it's colourful and there's puffins and you think, oh, it's lovely fluffy nature book. But we talk about climate breakdown, nature loss, capitalism, beauty standards, so many things. The experience of being a young woman and sexual harassment and so many things. And so I think I almost trap people into reading about these things sometimes, which is what actually someone else said to me, which I quite liked. But I think a place to start is actually arriving at the Seabird Centre for the first time, because there I meet an array of incredible species that I fell in love with very quickly, who are all declining and who I all tell their stories throughout the book. I don't exactly pinpoint out particular nesting pairs in this passage, but I go on after this to select a pair of each species to follow along for the whole summer, and across that 6 months see them laying an egg, it hatching, the fledgling flying off, and they all have names, which some people do and don't agree with, naming wildlife, but it was a very magical experience, and it all started here. I feel like I've practiced this a few times, so I'll let you know if my hand starts to fall off. After spending a few hours sorting the visitor centre, Rochelle asked me to clean the West Lighthouse and neighbouring Seabird platform. Eager to get closer to the birds, I hurried down the 89 steep sea cliff steps and 2 paths that led to the Seabird platform. I was met by a symphony of sound as I came to the first bend in the stairway. Then, some of the 250,000 seabirds that migrate here every year came into view, and the first sea stack appeared. Here, on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, beside one of the largest seabird colonies in the world, the wildlife was tossing and turning, hustling and bustling. The cliffs were alive with life. Descending the penultimate viewing platform, the cove opened up further and my sensations were overwhelmed. The smell of guano punched me in the face. It was something I would eventually become nose-blind to after countless hours on these cliffs, but in that moment it took my breath away. Readjusting to the wildness surrounding me, standing in awe, I felt my puffy face swell up and a tear roll down my cheek. It hadn't been easy deciding to come here, so arriving to this view felt like a sigh of relief. Now, facing hundreds of miles of sheer Atlantic wilderness, I was already glad we'd made the decision to move. It was as if someone had placed me in the middle of the climax shot of a wildlife documentary. Senses readjusted, clinging to the safety bars that lined the top of the sheer platform, I set out to identify anything and everything I could. A magical mayhem. Fulmars everywhere, circling the bay with a stiff upper wing, asserting their dominance. Kittiwakes, squawking at neighbours competing for the best patch and partner on the cliff. Razorbills high above my head with razor-sharp white eyeliner that can stand out from a mile away. Guillemots, so exposed, but with safety in numbers. There were so many of them, 150,000 to be exact. Adrenaline coursing through my blood, I stood alone on the edge of this island, the wildest place I'd ever been. Should have really remembered that bit. Thank you. So yeah, that gives a clear picture of the sort of place I'm working in for 6 months, and you begin to feel very quickly like you are just this tiny speck in this immense kind of amphitheatre of life, essentially.
I mean, it's Rathlin is an internationally recognised, celebrated conservation space. Can you tell us a little bit about how that shaped the way you view conservation and the way things like rights, nature's rights, and how that maybe evolved in your time there?
I think going to this island, only 6 miles long, a few miles wide, and meeting the people there is where it really clicked. I'd never experienced people living in such a mutualistic way. with nature, with the world around them, without any, environmental farming pots of money or initiatives or government-run schemes to do certain things. The islanders just have this way of working with the land and with its life. Don't get me wrong, there have been times where things had become intensified or a bit crazy, but then they all take it within themselves to actually work together as a team on the island and really change things, invest in projects. It's why, for example, the corncrake thrives there now. It's extinct across the rest of Northern Ireland, and it was locally extinct on Rathlin, but from community-based volunteer work, this red listed species at risk of extinction has returned. And there's now 6 calling males, which means there's around 12. And you can't see them anywhere else. And it's just such a good example of what can happen when people work together. And I think, they also, I say in here that they're also rich, not necessarily in, monetary terms, but in something a lot more important. And it also made me realise the way that we value the natural world. Around the time I was living there, 2021, a new massive paper had just come out from the International Monetary Fund, and it got me really angry, got me thinking really, really deeply, and especially paired with this island experience. And there's a section that I think might resonate with a lot of people here. So, we would have never purposely set out to destroy nature, which provides us with everything. But in a world that is increasingly lacking abundant green spaces, in a society that prioritises economy over ecology, it is no surprise that we forget the value of nature. And when I say we are forgetting the value, I don't mean the cost, I mean the life it supports. Here, I got to watch natural systems play out before my eyes on the cliffs every day. And it made me think deeply about the time in history when we allowed ourselves to become separate. Was it religion that made us think we were superior to the species around us, or class systems? I wasn't sure, but longed to know. Working in such a wild place, I felt equal to the flowers, bugs and birds, yet everything society had taught me allowed me to think I was worth more. It made me laugh that I'd been jokingly called bird brain as a child, when these seabirds I'd been connecting with could navigate their way across oceans. I couldn't even find my way home without Google Maps. There was a point in many civilizations, about 10,000 years ago, when humans realized if we created strong communities to share knowledge, food and resources, we would have a much stronger chance of survival. But a few thousand years into this framework, that structure of strength turned into our very weakness. The moment we placed a form of monetary value on our existence was the moment human civilization formed the concept of ever-growing, limitless capital in a finite world. We evolved from taking what was needed and living in balance with the natural world to a mindset that aimed to control it. We may be entering the Anthropocene, a unit of geological time used to describe the most recent period in Earth's history. However, where we have the most impact on the planet. However, I would argue it's also a time when humans can realise this mistake, coin the term, and attempt to undo our doings. Perhaps the first step, is to focus on where it all went wrong, the way we place value on the natural world. I feel this is especially important now because ever more frequently, even when we are trying to prove a species' worth, we use its monetary value as a means of persuasion. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, estimated the value of a single great whale at more than 2 million, which meant that the value of the current stock of great whales came to more than 1 trillion. The IMF based its figures on each whale's contribution to carbon capture, the fishing industry, and the way so that decision makers can view conservation efforts as more credible and economic. This is widely seen as a positive step in the right direction, but surely, while we are costing whales based off the economic benefit they provide to a capitalist system, we are not truly valuing their existence. If we did, We would ensure their world was free of noise, plastic and chemicals. We wouldn't deplete their food sources and trap them in nets. And I worry that overstating the whale's ability to mitigate our induced climate change may redirect attention from known methods of reducing greenhouse gas, such as, I don't know, ending fossil fuel expansion. If we base the intrinsic value of something, human, wild animal, or plant, on their economic cost, we are not truly valuing that species at all, nor our planet, nor ourselves. Doesn't nature deserve the right to exist as we do? Thank you.
You're here. I think it's really interesting in this moment. A lot of writing around conservation is having to grapple with capitalism. And I think whether it's Michaela Loach or looking recently like Robert MacFarlane looking at giving rights, like almost personhood rights to rivers. It's interesting to unpick that tension of like, are we, the master's tools will not destroy the master's house kind of thing. Can we really use capitalism to fix things?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the lessons you learned around conservation and that relationship to the natural world, and maybe where you are now and how it's informing how you're living and what you're doing now?
For sure, I think the biggest lesson I learned was that humans and our structures, our agriculture, our life doesn't have to be separate. In fact, the moment that we place ourselves as a separate entity from nature, is the moment it all goes wrong. I am in the incredibly privileged position to, especially after leaving Rathlin, have moved to my partner's family farm that's been in his family for like nearly 300 years. So there was a big pressure, which is one of the reasons we moved back to Ireland. So after Rathlin, a little 21-year-old, I kind of grappled with the idea of taking on this farm with him and being there forever. And I'm still there now, and that's exactly what we're doing. And so that's where the book ends, without trying to give any spoilers away. And I think from Rathlin, from seeing this kind of community-based nature conservation, and having this canvas to basically work on at home on the farm, I just threw myself into doing anything and everything I could with Craig to restore nature, bring communities into these spaces. I don't know if anyone here is aware of the Right to Roam campaign, and Northern Ireland, especially in the whole island of Ireland, is very bad for land access because of the colonial history. And so just giving people spaces to come and almost feel like it's a nature reserve was really important to us. And so we grow food, we changed a lot. We now grow all sorts of fruit, vegetable, nuts, seeds, things, and it's all with the premise of it being nature friendly, only in line with nature. And it's kind of year one of us scaling it up to a really big level. Polytunnel, outside growing spaces, but with the community's help, and with everything in the right balance. We are producing food that is healthy for us. We're seeing huge increases in all sorts of wildlife, especially insect populations, and it honestly was Rathlin that was the catalyst in this changing of my mindset that made me realise we don't have to be separate. And I think what I always say to people who feel very disillusioned by how much power we all have as individuals, when obviously it should be the systems that are changing, is imagine if we all saw the places that we live as lots of Rathlins. Like if we kind of glued lots of Rathlin Islands together across the country, it's almost kind of like a puzzle, and then you put that puzzle into the bigger picture and we can actually do something. And so I think, I'm a huge advocate for systems change, and that's where it needs to come from, but we actually have so much power, and there's so many initiatives to get involved with, and also when we have community, we have power. So like finding your people, just like everyone is, that's where it all starts. So that's, I think, the biggest lesson I learned.
I love that. If anyone's not familiar with Climate Camp in Scotland, it just recently happened. It happens every year, but there's a lot of grassroots stuff that stems out of that camp every year that spans the whole of Scotland, and is doing, I think, a lot of what your book is doing, and what some really interesting nature writing is doing right now, whether that's like Claire Rattinon or Ajal Barber, or that idea of like we have to grapple with the legacies of where how we've ended up here. And we have to talk about capitalism, we have to talk about different systems of oppression, and also we have to be accountable for what we are doing in our communities.
Especially in Ireland, because like the plantations that were set up in Northern Ireland, the legacy of that still exists today. Like all of the land, especially around Lough Neagh, was taken from Irish communities, and so there is very little land access. Like people who live in the countryside walk along the roads and risk getting hit by a car. And so I think even more over there, and like coming into it, although my mum's family are all from Cork, as an English person, I feel like especially like I really want to make sure that people actually can access their land again. I always see it as a human right almost, you know. So yeah. Anyway, sorry.
No, land access, food access.
Yeah, 100%.
I have lots of questions, but if you have burning questions, just chuck a hand up in the air. I wanted to ask you, just to divert from the book, a little bit about, again, where you are now. You have joined us from Switzerland, where you have been this week. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in the UN right now?
Yes, interesting. Has anyone here been following the Global Plastics Treaty? But yeah, so, oh, hello. Nature was just attacking me. So after leaving Rathlin 2021, I got involved in RSPB's policy team, and for a few years really went heavy and on down that road with them. Then left to do a degree, went to Canada, did some more research on a little island, and now I've come back into the policy sphere again with a charity called Surfers Against Sewage. I think a lot of people here probably know about them. They are like, I would say more radical than your average NGO. They'll kind of say things how it is, and that was our job, was to go out there to the UN, be in these really high-level corporate decision-making spaces and bring people's voices from the frontline communities in the UK and across the world, and also bring kind of that angry noise, to exposing the polluters, exposing the oil and plastics lobby that are there, attempting to derail negotiations. So what this plastics treaty is a hopefully global legally binding framework where that every country has pretty much agreed to end plastic pollution through reducing the production of it, to like better recycling systems and funding for like waste pickers and all sorts of things. But there's a big but. The petrostates, the oil and gas lobby are all there in force, trying to make sure that really important pieces of the text, such as stopping plastic production, are taken out, which obviously cannot happen. So the most influential period where I could be there was this whole week. So literally yesterday I went to Edinburgh, and I was there trying to advocate and I met with like the UK delegation, other countries. We did like some stunts in and out of the UN space. And it was honestly a very surreal, we've never been to the UN before, it was incredibly surreal to be there, because you really feel the disconnect from our world and that building. As much as it's meant to represent our building, everyone's in suits, no one's actually saying things as radically as you want them to. There was an evening reception on the first day where countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UK, like everyone was meeting for drinks, and it was super fancy outside the palace, you know, that's Palais des Nations, it's literally a palace, all like cheering and having fun, and I just sat there like actually crying, because I thought, this is so, like, we're facing the Alps that have increasingly less snow on each year. There is a lake that's being polluted in front of us, and you're all seeing the same thing I'm seeing, and yet you're so disconnected. And I actually felt like a bit of a Greta, this is a global North Greenwashing Festival vibe. Like, I was just like, I'm here to make a difference, and I know I am, and I know this can be a good deal, but also at the same time I cannot watch world leaders pat themselves on the back while the planet is literally burning in front of us. So it was a cool experience, but it was also a really dystopian one. So I'm glad I went, and I'm glad I did what I did, but also you'll get Hunger Games vibes if you go to the UN. But it was good. I'm gonna be paying very close attention. Back to work tomorrow, Monday. Going to be doing advocacy from afar, representing Seabirds, people on the front lines, anyone I can really, to try and make sure we get a deal across the line. So everyone, cross your fingers.
I think it's so notable that difference between feeling like there is agency, power, community on a localized level, and then you go into the spaces ostensibly of power, and in those ones, that's where we're disenfranchised from that connection to what actually matters and what we're able to do.
Yeah, and you do get the odd amazing rogue, very vocal person in these spaces, but there is conduct about these spaces, and people are very proper. And I never felt this more actually than when I first went into the policy space. It was to try and get Northern Ireland its first ever climate change act with the RSPB, and I was talking to ministers, like the environment minister at the time, who didn't actually believe in climate change. That was when it was really short. I was like, oh, how are we going to do this? We did in the end with a very, very determined group of people and politicians who were amazing. But it was, a proper wake-up call to how far we actually have to go. But yeah, I think actually one of the most, like, I know we haven't probably gotten to this question yet about like carrying on, but in relation to anything like human rights, nature rights, climate justice, I think we can't underestimate our power. Like, one of the most inspiring talks I've ever gone to was a theory of change lecture at my university that actually gave an example of like gay rights and how in a period of like 10-15 years under the Thatcher rule, it went from to gay marriage, but that wasn't because the Tories changed in any way. They were still scum. It was because there was an uprising and people were demanding better, and the feeling of society had changed, and we're not going to accept that anymore. It wasn't because the very literal same politicians that were in power were different. It's because they had to respond to the narrative of society. So I feel like if we have our role as bringing the narrative of society, that is a really good tool into changing what we want to change. So hopefully, that does something. Because whenever I feel like there's no hope, I always remember that.
I love that. I agree.
Yeah.
Do we have questions in the room? Okay, while you put your brains in gear, I have another one that is sort of connected to that, which is around this moment in demanding better. And obviously that's happened whether we're talking civil rights movements or gay rights movements, or people have demanded better for themselves and others continually. There is something quite specific to the climate movement in this moment that seems to have drawn together, unsurprisingly to those who are close to it, lots of neurodivergent people and youth. Young people are really activated by this idea that enough is enough, and that all these systems that we're being told are, well, it's just how it is. The people are kind of going, why and no, and organising differently, and you would fall in that bracket. And I wonder how you see that affecting the way people are organising, or the way, or what they're organising around.
I think it's really interesting to see how many neurodivergent people are in these spaces, and I think as someone who has ADHD, I feel like it's this inability to switch off from issues that really occupy your mind. It's a blessing and a curse, because like my partner will tell you, why can't you just like have a moment where you're not, why can't have a family function when you don't bring up climate change, and I'm like, sorry, I can't help it. It's just this, it's always there, and I think it's this kind of passionate stubbornness of feeling the weight of the world, even though, and there is a good, I think, level of where you should be to conserve your energy, to not burn out, to be most effective, and I haven't found that yet. But I feel like for me, my ADHD has definitely been a driving force in like having the energy to kind of fight the good fight. The likes of the most inspiring people in this space that I know, Greta, some amazing organisers in Ireland, kind of youth delegate in Ireland who went to the COP, are all eventually you find out neurodivergent and or could be, or just thinking a little differently. I think we're all on a bit of a different kind of wavelength of neurospiciness, to be honest. But yeah, it's definitely, I think it's a superpower, and I think it's going to be those sorts of people that change the world. I don't know if anyone's watched Chris Packham's programme, Inside Our Minds or something, or I can't remember exactly what it's called, but again, like so many, he is himself. And it took me, unfortunately, many years to actually even be able to tell people stuff like this, because for so long, you're made to feel really like it's so shameful and you shouldn't, be this way. But actually, I think that the reason that we are good in these spaces and are very vocal so often is because we've had years of not necessarily fitting in or not being slightly normal. And it's kind of a normal feeling, so we're not afraid of feeling it again. So that's probably the biggest reason I describe why I don't mind going and telling a politician that they're doing the wrong thing, because I know it might make me feel awkward, but I don't really care anymore. So it's that's probably it, really.
I love that. I think it also opens the door to people who feel these things very passionately. But we are socialised to defer to authority, to defer to men, to defer to capital. And I think that anyone that's busting down the doors with just a simple, just no, enables a lot of other people to be like, why do we go along with it? Why do we keep accepting the status quo that we know is damaging our communities, both in the natural world and as people.
And in the natural world, when you spend a very considerable amount of time with nature, you can see that even seabirds have such differences, and we are all so beautifully different, and that's just such a beautiful thing to hold on to. And another probably lesson that I learned, which is a bit slightly odd one, but just that if they can be who they are, and then so can we. And I think, honestly, I highly recommend going and spending 6 months on a cliff edge. It does wonders for your mental health.
Anyone in the room or online? Yeah, then go for it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Going back to the book that you were trying to write after having so many notes. Do you remember what helped you to select material?
Yes. Do you know what really helped? And this is maybe a bit of a boring answer, but I do had my camera with me the whole time. I do love taking photos, and so sometimes if I couldn't actually remember if this happened before this, or I actually look back through the dates on my pictures, which really helped. And do you know what? It was a really long period of reflection. It was. I don't think I've ever analysed a period of time in my life so much as to when I was writing this book. So it was also actually talking with a lot of people I worked with. That really helped, because sometimes they were like, oh yeah, no, that definitely happened in June. But often everything kind of fell into place from because it's very cyclical and seasonal, and knowing that an egg hatching on this date, the science on the island is very accurate. Puffins arrive around the 25th, 26th of March every year. It's everything has a timing, and so you can actually kind of guess when something happens from writing about it. So that also really helped. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
I love the idea of nature itself scaffolding the book.
Here's your
timeline.
Yeah, exactly. And they honestly help set the narrative. It was each month, each season, there's kind of the contents is literally arriving, landing, understanding, discovering, flourishing, gliding, surviving, thriving, reflecting, returning. And it's kind of what the seabird's life cycle is almost like. When they come and they go, and the whole thing is I almost landed there when the birds did, and I left when the birds did. And everything in my personal life was almost reflected on the cliffs in many ways, the highs, the lows,
The guano.
the guano. So, yes, but thank you for the question. I think that's what I haven't been asked yet, actually, and it's probably a key to the book, so yeah.
Go for it.
Can I ask how the birds are doing, and the bird flu and everything?
Yes. Yeah, no, good question, because this was written before the bird flu really hit. Unfortunately, there was a lot of losses, which was just awful, but it really did mainly hit gannet colonies and a lot of gulls, and Rathlin was overwhelmingly okay compared to a lot of Scottish islands. There was some amazing kind of precautions put in place, and the team did really well on that island to make sure it didn't spread. Like honestly, scaling cliffs to get birds, lift them out to make sure others aren't being infected. And also, like since I left the island, there was an amazing 4-year project called Life Raft that happened. It was like at the time, at least £4 million 4-year project, EU funded, to help eradicate the rats and ferrets on the island that were introduced several years ago that have decimated bird populations. So obviously it's like the less sexy side of nature conservation. You know, no one actually wants to save species by killing species, really. No one sets out to do that, but it's such an important part of wildlife conservation. And so, I mean, they haven't done the official press statement, tick, they're all gone yet, but we pretty much know that it's worked. The birds are showing signs of recovery, which is amazing. Obviously, we've got the bigger issue of climate change to deal with, which is all-encompassing worldly, which requires systems change. But on a local level, these small actions that have been taken have made such a huge difference. And it means now, so like the birds, the puffins, if anyone goes to Rathlin, you'll see they're right down on the lower grassy cliffs because the rats have kind of pushed them as far out of the fringes of their normal environment as they can go. And so now they're already like riding back up the cliffs again. So it's amazing what some actions like that can do. Yeah.
Do we have any others? Yeah, go for it.
You mentioned about photos.
Yes. Oh yes. Yeah, absolutely. Are there any photographers in the room here who know? Well, basically, I mean, I would say I'm a very amateur photographer. Always just have my camera with me though, because especially on the Rathlin Sound, you never know what you're going to see. So I always just had it like ready to go. Literally, it's an hour crossing, but I was just like this the whole time, just in case. And one day on the way back from the island to the mainland to see Craig for a few days, there was a movement in the water, and I was like, oh, what's this? Focused in. I thought it was a dolphin at first, and I took a few photos, zoomed in on the photos, and very instantly realised that it was a thresher shark. One of the most iconic, coolest sharks you could probably ever see. They're called a thresher shark because they've got this kind of thresh-like tail where they stun their prey, and in doing so, often they'll basically like just push out of the water like they're a dolphin breaching. So yeah, I saw this shark leap out of the water 3 times, and I managed to actually get photos of it, screaming. I eventually sent them into some local conservation charities, and I was also told that it was the first recorded thresher shark sighting ever in Northern Irish waters. So I was like, adding that to the CV right now. But yeah, it was incredible to see an animal that's really, really threatened with extinction. They rely so heavily off such precise environments and temperatures and for their food sources. And it was also actually kind of concerning to see them kind of more shallow waters and also closer to the surface and the inland, because they're endothermic, which means that they almost recycle their blood very close to the surface of their skin from the inside, which keeps them warm. And that's meant for really icy cold water. So it was kind of, shocking to see them, but also incredible because I'd always wanted to see one. Used to work on wildlife tour boats, and especially in Cornwall there have been a few sightings, and it was never me on that boat that saw it, so it was very, very exciting. But like you never know what you're going to see on the water, so always you just keep looking out at the sea and not on your phone, because you just never know what you're gonna spot.
I think we have time for one last burning question if there is one in the room. Otherwise, you can be shy here and then come through and meet Ruby and ask your questions next door at the sign-in. Then that is what we are going to do. I would encourage you to pick up this very beautiful book, not just beautiful for its radical content, but also for the incredible illustrations. Do have a flick through it. It is beautifully illustrated. And Ruby's also brought us these amazing bookmarks that say, like Seabirds, we have strength in numbers. So do pick up one of those. And also just a reminder that we have a pay it forward system where people who have book money put book money on the board, and people who don't can take a tag like a voucher to buy a book. So if you can't afford the book, but you want the book, you can still get the book because
So
somebody
lovely.
has put that money on the board for you. And I think that brings us to the end. Will you please put your hands together for Ruby Free? Okay, if you keep your seats for 2 seconds, I'm going to extract Ruby so that we can be on the other side.